Good morning. It is October the 5th. I am making this blog for October the 4th because I got a little busy yesterday. Wasn't able to do it. Um, I was tired, so I went to sleep. I guess this is turning 40. Uh, see what happened yesterday? Well, some of you know I'm a business owner. So I was at my mailbox yesterday in the morning doing notaries, live scans, helping the people, kissing babies, doing that kind of thing. And I also volunteered at an elementary school yesterday where I teach an engineering program. Not all the time, but a couple times a month maybe. Anyway, I've been there all week, and today's Saturday. Um, but it's been interesting, like dealing with kids, especially kids in our neighborhood, inner city kids. Um, they give you a different perspective on life, especially watching them go through it and paying for sins of their fathers, as I like to call it. So, interesting conversation yesterday with one of my coworkers at the elementary school. He's an African gentleman from Nigeria, and basically, I don't know if any of you have ever had conversations with international brothers or whatever. I'm pretty sure you have nowadays. The world's a melting pot, but it's a different perspective that people have on Black Americans that live here in America. It's almost as if they look at us like, well, why are you guys still going through this shit? So it's kind of frustrating to have conversations, but it is a good dialogue. It's a good, healthy dialogue. Like, I think no ill will of my friend, my coworker. He just has a different perspective on things than I do. So it's interesting for me because I get to learn a little more about his perspective and kind of teach at the same time. So this was one of those conversations where he was wondering why there's such a disparity between Black Americans or African Americans in the United States of America, because he is of African descent. He comes here, with several degrees from home, and he's here seeking opportunity. So they hit the ground running. I mean, if you know some Africans, a few of them work security jobs, but possibly have 2 engineering degrees and maybe a prince from their country, which is the case sometimes, not all the time, but yeah, definitely is a work ethic that I've noticed throughout the African community that comes here to work. So long story short, we got into the conversation about white and black and how how you can go anywhere you want, but certain areas will treat you differently. And the brother made an analogy about his home where it was a similarity, but I think we lost something there. It was him explaining that tribes happen in his country. And with the tribes, you can be anywhere you want to be. It's legal to be wherever you want to be. But after a certain time of night, you can't be from one tribe and be in particular places, which means, there could be some detriment to you. Somebody could run up on you, kill you, whatever. Well, I explained that was very, very similar to our gang culture here in Los Angeles, where if we considered them the gangs tribes, it'd be the same scenario where legally you can hang out anywhere you want. But you probably don't want to be a blood hanging out in this neighborhood at this particular time, or being a Crip hanging out over here on this particular block. It's, same scenario. Although Africa is the most abundant continent in the world, it is not owned by its people. All of the resources are raped from this country from the beginning and still being done now. So it's just interesting to see that we have some similarities there. Our communities are being raped right up under our noses, and we're, unable to make a fight for it unless you've already gotten something going on in your life. Your parents left you something, got some equity, opening up a business like we have, or you just work hard and stack your money, get your retirement, whatever. There is some disparity in the U.S. where, we have wage differences when it comes to women and men and black and white. We have discrimination on hiring practices and living in which communities you can live in, and buying homes and credit, and even getting cars sometimes. Like, everything has its way about it. Being a black person, I could walk outside right now, and depending on where I am, there could still be a very heavy element of racism or discrimination or whatever. I see it every day, sometimes from my own people, but I don't dwell in it. I'm one that tries to push forward and move with a more positive conversation than what we've been having in the past. So, yeah, with that, the conversation was enlightening to some levels. I feel like, no disrespect, but it was more like talking to someone who was a little disconnected from, the streets, from the neighborhoods. Similar to talking to somebody who's of the upper echelon, who's high status financially or a celebrity or something like that. You're not really in the streets. You don't really touch the pulse of the people. You don't really get what's going on or why somebody's sitting over here drooling because they didn't smoke themselves off or whatever. There's a mental health that happens in our communities, and it's been something that's been beat into us. I think the mentality that we have. I'm not making any excuses for it. I'm just stating the facts. But I did get into that conversation with the gentleman, and I spoke to him, and I mentioned to him, it's been happening with us since the early inception of America. My premise to him was, and this was probably the only part that we agreed on, my premise with him was I didn't believe in white people. I believe that it's a terminology that's only been used here in America. I mean, I'll ask you the same question I've asked him. I said, what country of origin does white come from? What country calls its citizens white or black, for that matter? And the only answer to that is America. This shit was made up here. Now, most people know that this is an immigrant country. It was all started by immigrants, aside from the Native Americans that were here. So everybody here is an immigrant. Which is weird about the laws that we're putting in place right now for some of our Mexican-American brothers. Also, it's a little strange that, we don't just call ourselves American. To be called white or black or anything like that just puts us on a color spectrum. It doesn't even include us in the Constitution that was written years ago, where we were written in as Negroes. 2/3 of a person, obviously, but still written into the Constitution. So that just goes to show how America used to give us small wins to make it seem like we were included in this on a positive note, but our inclusion only came from slavery and degradation. Our culture's been beat down to a point where it has shown over hundreds of years and generation after generation that it's a mental abuse that's been happening, where people can't get out of a certain way of life in their minds. So a lot of people don't understand that plight, especially if you're not growing up here in the States. It's not an excuse, it's a reason. And once we can identify some of the reasons, we can move differently. We can teach our children differently. We can stop telling these lies about Santa Clauses and Easter bunnies laying eggs and fairies putting money under your pillow when your teeth fall out. It's untruths. So it makes it harder for them to believe in other things like God or other things that, aren't tangible in life. So basically it's putting our children up on the chopping block where culture is being given to them versus taught to them at home. We have to earn our culture.